And thanks also for being flexible in the rescheduling of this event. We originally had Rachel set to deliver a craft talk the day after the election. Bad planning on my part. So I'm glad we can kind of regroup and regather. And I can't think of a better writer to sort of welcome us back to the Visiting Writer Series and into this new era of American politics. And so really glad to see you all here today. We even accommodated a change of weather for the new vibe. I also just want to introduce today by just as a reminder that today is Transgender Day of Remembrance. Woo! The day was started by Gwendolyn Ann Smith in 1999 to honor Rita Hester, who was killed in 1998. And it's a day that seeks to spotlight the losses that we face due to anti-transgender violence. This evening, the Center for Women and Gender Equity is collaborating with Pride and the Mission Ministry Center for a program honoring transgender voices, followed by a prayer service beginning to honor and remember transgender lives that have been cut short by community violence. This event will begin at 7:15 p.m. tonight in front of the chapel, and it will be followed by a reception. So we hope to see you there for an evening of story sharing, community presence, and remembrance at 7:15 in front of the chapel. With that, I'm also just really pleased to welcome back to St. Mary's College for her second stint as a distinguished visiting writer, Rachel Howard, who is a gifted memoirist and novelist and critic. We talk a lot in this program about writing across genres and being open to hybrid forms and writing across genres, and I can't imagine a writer who embodies that more than Rachel. In her first book, The Lost Night, a memoir about her father's unsolved murder, she resists the pressure of popular culture to place all hope of closure in true crime's idea of justice, and instead seeks a deeper, if more emotionally complex, piece. The New York Times wrote of The Lost Night, it's an enthralling, skillfully narrated story that begins as a tale of detection, but quickly becomes something more. More recently, Rachel's debut novel, The Risk of Us, was published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in 2019. Jamie Quatro said, "I've never read anything so beautiful about the intricacies of adoption, the process itself, and the seldom talked about aftermath. The prose is elegant and compressed. I often had to stop reading to catch my breath. Anyone who has ever loved a child in any capacity should read this book." An endorsement I wholeheartedly second. Even more recently, Rachel is a 2024 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow in Literature. Congratulations. She's published short fiction and nonfiction in Zyzzyva, StoryQuarterly, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the New York Times Magazine, among many other venues. Rachel earned an MFA in fiction as a program for writers at Warren Wilson College, and later served there as the Joan B. Teaching Fellow and Interim Director of Undergraduate Creative Writing. And another thing that makes Rachel just an extraordinarily wonderful fit for St. Mary's is the way that liberal arts and fine arts informs her entire life. After graduating from the University of California, Santa Barbara's College for Creative Studies, Rachel began a career as a dance critic in San Francisco and wrote about dance for the San Francisco Chronicle for nearly 20 years and continues practicing dance criticism to this day. On a more personal note, we really pride ourselves here at St. Mary's in bringing people who are not only gifted writers, but also just gifted teachers. And one of the highlights of my week every week is the Tuesday afternoon before Rachel's class, her graduate class, but just watching the sort of inspired frenzy that her students are working in preparation for your class. And so I just want to thank you for just the care and attention and rigor you're bringing to the classroom and to our student studies. We're so glad to have you back here. And everyone, just your warmest round of applause to welcome Rachel Howard.
Thank you for being here. I hope something will be helpful in here, and we always hope a craft talk won't be too boring as well. That's also to be honest. So I hope that there's some ideas in here that might be interesting or spark new directions for you. And I just want to start by saying what a good fortune it has been in my life to be here this term. I've been teaching the undergraduates and the graduates, both wonderful groups of writers who have been so supportive to each other in our classroom conversations and have written, I'm looking at one of them right now, truly inspiring work, really incredible and inspiring work that I get to hear from them on a weekly basis. So what a gift that has been to be here with you. All right, this talk is called Writing from the Heat of the Moment, Improvisation in Fiction and Nonfiction Writing. There's a handout, and if you don't have it, you can probably shoot your hand up, and one of the, I think Kendra has some still if anyone wants the handout. And it's going to be using jazz improvisation as an analogy. And so I'm actually going to start with singing you the lyrics, because you know the way it goes, the tradition in jazz is you have these songs, right, that are called the standards, and all the jazz musicians know them, and you start with the standard and then they rip on them. That's the tradition of improvisation. And so this is Sunny Side of the Street from 1930, music by Jimmy McHugh, but some people think that Fats Waller actually wrote it. And a woman lyricist, Dorothy Fields, which is kind of rare in jazz. So I just want you to hear the actual song, and then I will play for you the clip of the improv on it. Okay, it's fast. Grab your coat and don your hat. Leave no worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear a pitter pat? And that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. Okay, so that's the song. And here is All right, yeah, thanks. So that's Ray Grant on piano, Tommy Grant on bass, and Charlie Persip on drums. And that's Dizzy Gillespie stepping up to take his solo, recorded in 1958 for the album Sunny Side Up. When I first heard this solo, I had just begun singing the standards of the Great American Songbook. 14 years later, I can't say I've made a lot of progress on my musicianship, but Gillespie's solo still arrests me. There's the sheer exuberance and clarity of his instrument's tone, yes. There's the heat of feeling, of being really in the moment. But how is it that his solo holds us in the moment? Gillespie's playing is spontaneous, but random notes played spontaneously will soon enough test our attention rather than hold it. Ask the avant-garde musicians who purposely test us. Gillespie's solo, as with any great jazz solo, isn't just spontaneous, it also has shape. It is free and in the moment, but it is also composed. Gillespie isn't just letting feeling flow forth, but making quick decisions within a game of musical structures and rules. Rules many listeners are aware of subconsciously, as Western ears have absorbed the conventions of scales and chord progressions over years of listening to Western music. And then there's that long high note that brings Gillespie's solo to the peak. The timing of that note is just right in a way that transcends the rote counting and subdividing of beats. A hair earlier, a hair later, no. You don't think so much as feel that the note had to happen just then. That note brings all of time together into relationship. Before I get into the writing part of this craft talk, and it's coming, I swear, I promise, I want to talk more about time. I think we would all agree that there are different qualities of time, different ways that we inhabit time. Scientific scholarship hypothesizes that our sense of time is connected to the quality of attention we give experience, so that when we are babies and toddlers and experience is new, time is slower, whereas when we are middle-aged and so much of experience is rote, time moves faster. Side note, a study released this year found that cyclists experience time 8 to 9% slower while exercising. This feels true to me, even though I cannot give you a scientific disquisition on quantum space-time relations. Another thing that makes sense to me is that the ancient Greeks had 2 words for time, each with a different sense. Chronos was used, as you can guess from the root, to mean chronological time, measured time, forward-ticking time. Kairos, on the other hand, meant an opportune or decisive moment. It's swirling, and as such, Kairos entails a way of being in time. In Kairos, time is not just ticking forward, it's swirling, and past, present, and future are held in relationship. My awareness of Kairos comes not from any depth of Greek scholarship, but from church. I'm Episcopalian, which some people think of as Catholic light, all the liturgy, none of the papal authority. And other people think means I eat no meat except fish. Which is a strange line, but I kept it in because of pescatarian, Episcopalian, sometimes I actually did that. Episcopalians think of Kairos time as transcending chronological time and bringing us into moments of transcendence and possible redemption. The Franciscan contemplative Richard Rohr thinks of Kairos as deep time, as, quote, those moments when past and present merge into clarity and fullness. This definition sounds as if experiencing Kairos is pure bliss, like being immersed in a solo on sunny side of the street. I do think Kairos can be like that, but it can also be terrifying. Kairos can bring us into a suspense that feels unbearable. Consider these Kairos moments. It's the 1990s, before HIV treatments were developed, and you are in a medical building lobby waiting to be called in for the results of an HIV test you took because you have cause to believe you're positive. Or it's the 1960s in France, and abortion is outlawed. You've just learned you're pregnant. The man who brought about this condition isn't someone you ever want to see again, and you are certain you do not wish to raise the child. Or you've just moved your family to a new town, and night is falling. The 14-year-old who just 6 months ago was in the hospital, the child you built your whole life around raising, the child who since the move to the new town has been miraculously recovering. Your child left for a bike ride and said she would be home 2 hours ago. A year ago, she had a habit of bringing home cracked cell phones and other items from people she would talk with on the street or beneath the overpass. Now you're thinking she's either lost or she's with the people who live next to the 7-Eleven. And your imagination can take it from there. She doesn't have any devices on her. You can't reach her, so you call the police. Your husband has driven all over town looking for her without a sign. On the dark suburban block, the yellow streetlights have flickered on. You run out into the middle of the pavement and scream your child's name into the night. Chronologically, Kairos can last for 2 minutes. It can last for 2 years. You're in a space where your sense of what the theologian Paul Tillich calls ultimate concern has come into sharp focus. You are possessed by one insight that connects everything. All of your existence is reordered around this focus. You cannot will such a state to come upon you. You would want to be in this state your whole life. And most importantly for us here today as writers, when you find yourself in Kairos, you don't want to waste it, which is where jazz, improvising, and writing connect. After 13 years of singing, I'm not appreciably better at improvising, but I have come to appreciate that musicians are doing a whole lot more than the sonic equivalent of writing morning pages when they step up for a solo. I've come to appreciate the implications of the very word improvisation. The Latin root is provisus, which means foreseen or make preparation for. So to improvise is to respond without having foreseen. From the Oxford Dictionary, to improvise means to create and perform spontaneously or without preparation, and also to produce or make something from whatever is available. I especially like that last definition, from whatever is available. But the idea that a musical improviser performs without preparation is misleading. Any masterful improviser has spent years of preparation to enable spontaneity. My proposition in this craft talk is that the more we writers think of ourselves as musical improvisers and prepare accordingly, the more powerfully we can hold Kairos on the page for ourselves and for our readers. I've been thinking on this a lot because a year and a half ago, after a series of shocking events with unresolved implications and high stakes, a state that might feel in common with everybody right now, yeah, I found myself intensely inside Kairos, past, present, and future, refusing to separate, swirling around an unrelenting awareness of ultimate concern. The only way I could tolerate being in such a state was to write into it. And I became a magnet for books written at the extreme end of the improvised spectrum. These books are written with very little distance between the lived moment and the act of writing about the moment. They are spontaneous responses, and yet they are highly composed. Like Dizzy Gillespie stepping up for his solo in Sunny Side of the Street, the literary artist in each case finds a way to work within the rules that bring structure to the heat of the moment. I've also thought a lot about writers who use one fresh Kairos experience to take the reader back inside an earlier Kairos experience. Again, finding ways to work within rules, within restraining forces that bring form to what would otherwise be formless. Today, I'm going to look at examples of books on the far end of the improvisation spectrum. But I want also to consider the ways that the sense of improvisation applies to our composing and revision process for all writers. Example one is Deborah Levy's Living Autobiography series. Somewhere around 2010, the London-based writer Deborah Levy found herself in a Kairos moment. After a career of brilliant writing that gathered little notice, she had put her all into a new novel manuscript, and when she finished, she knew that this novel was strong, but no one would publish it. She also decided to dissolve her marriage of 34 years, a marriage in which she had raised 2 daughters. It's this Kairos moment, more obliquely described, that opens her book, Things I Don't Want to Know. That spring when life was very hard and I was at war with my lot and simply couldn't see where there was to get to, I seemed to cry most on escalators at train stations. Going down them was fine, but there was something about standing still and being carried upwards that did it. From apparently nowhere, tears poured out of me, and by the time I got to the top and felt the wind rushing in, it took all my effort to stop myself from sobbing. It was as if the momentum of the escalator carrying me forwards and upwards was a physical expression of a conversation I was having with myself. Escalators, which in the early days of their invention were known as traveling staircases or magic stairways, had mysteriously become danger zones. Levy decides to leave London for Mallorca, taking her laptop and on it her rejected novel. At some point not long after the trip, she decides to write about this Kairos moment, and we can deduce this because by 2013, Things I Don't Want to Know is published. But this book is not an account of that trip. Really, it's a set of improvisations from within an intensely focused experience. Within 10 pages of Things I Don't Want to Know, the title has entered the writing explicitly. As Levy settles into her Mallorca writing space, the narrator says, I did not know why I had brought the Polish notebook with me to Mallorca. Actually, I did know. The Polish notebook contains source material for the novel that hasn't found a publisher. Quote, but I did not want to think about this. what we don't want to know but know anyway, what we can't stand to know and so therefore suppress. That is the abstract idea that continually brings Levy's writing back to a center where everything connects. The other word we have for this center in writing is theme. And anyone who has taken workshop with me knows that I am obsessed with theme. Or rather, what the novelist Eileen Pollock in a Craft article renames aboutness. Pollock suggests that you think of theme as a driving question at the center of the work, an abstract question short enough to fit on a Post-it note. Think short but grand. Is it better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all? Or, how does a person become free? That last question is what Edward St. Aubin said his quartet of Patrick Melrose novels was actually about. Notice that formulating your theme as a question rather than a statement fundamentally changes your relationship to the material you are working with. You are not proving a position to the reader, but honestly holding a dilemma that does not have one right answer. See also Chekhov. You are right to demand that an artist engage his work consciously, but you confuse two different things: solving the problem and correctly posing the question. The power of the abstract, unifying question lies in how it interacts with the concrete specifics of your material. By the end of Things I Don't Want to Know, Levy's aboutness has held as the center for two different sets of material. In the early chapters of Majorca, she's thinking about her knowledge that, quote, the societal system suppresses the power and autonomy of women. Then, in a long middle section, she shifts to thinking about her childhood experience of the apartheid system in South Africa, where white adults suppressed their knowledge of the indefensibility of their unjust system. Levy grew up with an anti-apartheid father who was imprisoned by the state. By the end of Things I Don't Want to Know, we have traveled through South Africa and back to Majorca, where the proprietress at Levy's lodgings has just fled an abusive male family member, bringing Levy to a peak insight intensely relevant to being a woman and a writer. Quote, we were both on the run from the lies concealed in the language of politics, from myths about our character and purpose in life, the way we laugh at our own desires, the way we mock ourselves before anyone else can, the way we are wired to kill ourselves. It doesn't bear thinking about. One page later, as the pages still to be read are becoming quite slim in the book, Levy's theme peaks as an explicit question, quote, what do we do with knowledge that we cannot bear to live with? What do we do with the things we do not want to know? Often in writing, especially in short stories, the thematic question remains invisible, the secret center that the reader feels between the lines of the concrete details. As Pollock notes in her Craft article, it is often advisable to write a whole draft of a short story without defining this aboutness, the better to free your unconscious and then go back to the draft and look for the theme. But I want to point out how helpful it is in highly improvisational writing to define this question for yourself at the outset, to make it explicit, and to refer to it explicitly, even repeatedly. It serves not only you, but your reader, like a musical motif that catches the listener's ear and lends structure and shape as you proceed. Levy plays the Things I Don't Want to Know motif at least a dozen times in the book, even in small moments such as a childhood scene when Levy's godmother has just discovered that a 6-year-old Levy has just let her precious pet bird out. There were things she wanted to know. Just playing the phrase promises connection to a center that holds and keeps the reader and the writer aware of the larger game we're in together. Next section is called Borrow Some Chord Changes You Can Play Against. You can see the poets nodding, because I steal all the poets' tricks. Let's admit, though, that the theme itself is not a whole lot to hold you when you're stepping up to improvise. We might even posit there's a relationship between how spontaneous we're being and how many rules we need to guide us. In that first book of what became a trilogy, Levy frames her improvisation as a response to George Orwell's long essay, Why I Write, giving herself a container and a structure. She takes Orwell's 4 great motives as her chapter headings. In political purpose, she fixates on a poster of the human skeletal system that she keeps misreading as the societal system. In historical impulse, she recalls living with her pro-apartheid godmother in South Africa while her father was imprisoned. In the chapter titled Sheer Egotism, she takes us back to her first ego-fueled attempts to write as a teenager in London, and in Aesthetic Enthusiasm, we meet back up with her in Mallorca, where she marries her rage of the societal system with a calm commitment to her novel. So each of those chapter headings was one of Orwell's stated 4 reasons for writing. Note that Levy is writing not just within, but also against Orwell's headings. You might think of this as being a jazz musician who's soloing over the chord changes of a well-known song. The least interesting thing a soloist can do is called running the changes. This means to play a solo that uses only the notes that are actually in each chord. The more interesting way to work is to play not only within the chord, but also against it. A deliberately sharp note here, a blue note there. After all, the listener is interested in the artist's relationship with what has already been established. And that's what Levy gives us early in Things I Don't Want to Know. Quote, Adrienne Rich, who I was reading at the time, said it exactly like this: no woman is really an insider in the institutions fathered by masculine consciousness. This male consciousness was also unconsciousness. End quote. I want to offer then that if you find yourself writing from within Kairos, it is supremely useful to find a text that you agree with in some points, but crucially find lacking or questionable in others, and to use your conversation with this text in the writing. By invoking this text, you have far stronger resources for writing in the heat of the moment. Next section is called Free of Backstory, Becoming the Lightning Rod. Levy's improvisation keeps building after Things I Don't Want to Know. Her second book in this highly improvisational series is The Cost of Living. By this point, she is calling the book's, quote, a working autobiography. Moving on from Orwell, she reframes her present concern. She is deep into her divorce, and she doesn't begin book 2 with her own marriage. She starts instead with a scene in which she overhears a young woman at a restaurant. This young woman is in conversation with a stranger, a man who barely listens to her story, unable to see that a young woman is not, by default, the, quote, minor character. Thus, the new motif is established. Who gets to be a major character? And how do you become your own true character when society thinks it has written your character for you? This is the new center that connects past, present, and future in Levy's spontaneous composition. Here, I want to point out the one major advantage of this kind of improvisational writing. It eliminates the need, or perhaps just the temptation, to get dragged into dead or self-involved backstory. Levy tells the reader almost nothing about her marriage and its dissolution, other than, quote, I will never stop grieving for my long-held wish for enduring love that does not reduce its major players to something less than they are, end quote. And notice how that reconnects us to the opening idea of minor and major characters. Nor is Levy teasing us with this withholding in order to parcel out information as she goes on. Over the next 340 pages of Book 2, The Cost of Living, and Book 3, Real Estate, we learn almost nothing about her ex-husband or why the marriage ended. This is my favorite aspect of highly improvisational writing. It can pull us out of wallowing in dead moments and into exploring live ones. Part of the excitement of this writing is the faith involved in putting forward a theme and introducing motifs that play upon it. Sometimes the great thrill from a creator's point of view is how doing this then shapes the real-life experience unfolding in front of you. Your thematically focused consciousness becomes a kind of lightning rod for electric currents in the world. By the middle of The Cost of Living, Levy's long-rejected novel has not only been published, but it has been shortlisted for a career-changing award. Levy finds herself talking with film executives, tasked to give them a list of potential major characters for the movie of her book. There's conflict aplenty as she observes how women characters who behave in the ways men would are quickly deemed unlikable. Book 2 and Book 3 in the Living Autobiography series each begin with a fresh metaphor to hold the story together, but established motifs continue while new motifs enter. In the next and final book, Real Estate, we follow Levy to Paris. She's won a fellowship to live there for 6 months, where she considers her imaginary unreal estate, but also buys character shoes in a bid to claim an as-yet unwritten major character role for herself. For the turning point of the final book, reality responds spectacularly to Levy's thematic lightning rod. Crashing a literary party, she encounters a successful male author whose drinking had, quote, liberated his desire to find a female writer in the room to undermine. The writer asks her, quote, do you sometimes look in the mirror and think all this success came rather late in the day and so much exposure is rather vulgar, a total bore and awfully fatiguing? He leaned back on his heels and waited for me to agree with him. His face was red and he was sweating. This soon leads Levy's narrator, a narrator she tells us who both is and is not her actual self, to her triumphant final turn. Quote, it has never ceased to fascinate me how there will always be a man and his female consorts who wish, above all else, to take down a woman who takes herself seriously. A few pages after that comes the peak insight that connects everything to the metaphor the book has riffed on. Quote, the truth was that he viewed every female writer as a sitting tenant on his land. If his class and education had taught him to regard his own thoughts as monumental, it had not taught him to read the work of women and writers of color. Therefore, he was bereft of some of the most important ideas for the world and the most exciting innovations within form. It's a passage that thrills me like Gillespie's solo, the right note at the right moment. So I'm going to move on to my next example now. This is called Short Improvisations, Kairos Within Chronos. So I started the talk with Levy's tour de force example of an epic improvisation. I want to go to the other extreme now, to small improvisations that make an accessible entry point for approaching your own art this way. Perhaps the ultimate small improvisation is the daily journal. We're not talking here about morning pages, but a kind of improvisation working within a theme to spontaneously make shape with the materials at hand. Ross Gay, the poet, did just this for the small daily essays that became his collection, The Book of Delights, and later a second collection, The Book of More Delights. And we read The Book of Delights in our undergrad nonfiction class and practiced this together this semester. In choosing to write about delight, he finds that the currents of the world connect to his electric theme antenna much as they did for Levy. As Ross Gay writes in his preface, quote, it didn't take me long to learn that the discipline or practice of writing these essays occasioned a kind of delight radar. Or maybe it was the development of a delight muscle, something that implies the more you study delight, the more delight there is to study. He also lets the reader in on the rules of his improvisation right away. Write a delight every day for a year, begin and end on my birthday, August 1st, draft them quickly, and write them by hand. Like Levy, Gay is centering his improvisation not on his concrete material, but on an abstract question. What is, or could be, delight? And as he writes in his preface, this abstraction soon reacts alchemically with the concrete stuff of his days. Quote, my mother is often on my mind, racism is often on my mind, kindness is often on my mind, politics, pop music, books, dreams, public space, my garden is often on my mind. We're all writers here, so I wonder if you, like me, have kept a journal for years or decades. If so, you may have found yourself using your journal in distinct ways. Sometimes I have used my journal just to wax melodramatic about my oh-so-important life, or to wallow, though I found myself doing less of that, thank God, after my 20s. On occasion, I have found myself stabbing my journal with sudden released anger or just staring at it, a meditation in itself. Often these days I use my journal to document things as they are happening so I won't lose the tactile details later. But 30 years on in a writing practice, my favorite way of using my journal is as Gay does, as a space for composing small improvisations, of seeing how I can work with the day's material to create form. On a good day, sitting down with a journal with this intention, I latch onto a detail, an insight to swirl around, a connection between past, present, and future. And on those days, although I can't will it to happen, I move from Chronos into Kairos. In the essays that Gay chooses for his collection, he does just this spectacularly. So here is his essay, Flower in the Curve, and look at how it brings past, present, and future into relationship. Today I was walking back from some errands and I realized I take the same route all the time. Up forth past the bakery, past a solicitous cat that chases me and yowls at me to scratch behind its ears. I always make the left just before the big graveyard across the street from where my friend Don Belton lived for a year before he moved a few blocks away and 3 months later was murdered. I wonder if I ever pass Don's house and don't think of him. Next to that house, butterflies dapple the hedge of Bulea, their wings listing in the moist Indiana heat. One day I was pulling my friend Aracelius on a skateboard behind my bike, and we turned this corner, and Don sprinted out in sweatpants and no shirt, hearing probably the growling of the skateboard and peeking out if I didn't also yell in his window, which I did almost every single time I rode by his house. I was sweating and probably glistening, and Don made a big flirty show of wiping the sweat from my brow. I'm a prodigious sweater, so it wasn't hard to come by, and dabbling it on his own, pretending to swoon. This while Aracelius looked on laughing. The memories don't stop, and so perhaps today I will rename that not quite road, that alley between 4th and 3rd, starting at Don's house, Belton Way. Now, returning from my errands, walking up Belton Way, as I approached 3rd, I saw something bright, maybe an empty bag of Grippos or something on that curb. But as I got closer, sure enough, it was some kind of gorgeous flower, mostly a red I don't think I actually have words for. A red I've maybe only ever seen in this flower, growing out of the crack between the curb and the asphalt street at the terminus of Belton Way. The gold is like a corona around the petals, and there are a few flecks throughout, the way people will have freckles in their eyes or glints of lightning in their pupils. And beside this flower, or kin with it, growing from the same stem as the blazing, is an as-yet unwrapped bud, greenish with the least hint of yellow, shining in the breeze, on the verge, I imagine, of exploding. For anyone who would like to undertake a daily improvisation similar to Gay's, it's worth noting here that his theme, like Levy's, is actually very subversive in combination with the concrete material he has to work with, a kind of writing against a position. Gay is a black man living and teaching in Midwestern America in a culture rife with images and accounts of black suffering and prone to erasing stories of black joy. For Gay to write about daily delight naturally activates a dynamic critique of all of this, one that is effective because it is powerfully organic rather than pointedly polemical. Consider an essay not long after Flower in the Curb. This one is titled Hole in the Head. I love weird vernacular sayings that roll off the tongue and most likely have an interesting lineage, etymology, and history. I can't think of one right now, but you know what I mean. Well, here's one. I need X like I need a hole in the head. I'm thinking of that phrase because there's a recently released documentary called Hole in the Head about Virtue's Hardiman, a man who grew up in Lyle Station in southern Indiana, about 90 miles from where I'm writing this. Station was a town established by free blacks in the 1800s. I learned today, watching the trailer for that documentary and with some subsequent online research, that when Hardiman was a boy in the 1920s, he was one of a group of little children, little test subjects, upon whom radiation experiments were performed. The experiments exposed these little children, little test subjects, to severe levels of radiation such that, for little 5-year-old Hardiman, it burned a hole in his head. If you're like me, you're picturing a scalp wound, like a cigarette or cigar burn. Don't picture that. Picture a fist-sized crevice in his skull, flesh and fat glistening as he removes the sock hat and bandages beneath, all the surrounding skin charred, pink and gray. I'm trying to remember the last day I haven't been reminded of the inconceivable violence black people have endured in this country. When talking to my friend Kia about struggling with paranoia, she said, "You have to be crazy not to be paranoid as a black person in this country. Crazy not to think they want to put a hole in your head." For whom do we write a journal? Perhaps one thing that takes Gay's practice beyond the journal and into the art of essay is he's composing with a sense of a listener, a named you. Again, you'll notice the dynamic interplay between the abstract theme and the concrete specifics that the theme interacts with. Not only is it surprising to delight in the phrase hole in the head, but this takes us into a very undelightful incident of horrifying racism. Gay's address to the audience lets us pause and inhabit the moment of writing with him. Don't picture that. Picture a fist-sized crevice in his skull. The essay ends on a dark note, doesn't bring us back into a sense of delight. But as the collection progresses, it is delight that reigns supreme, defiantly. And Gay uses his awareness of improvising on a subversive theme to shape the collection on the macro level, too. The Book of Delights contains 102 essays, presented sequentially according to the day they were composed. Was it foresight or improvisational feeling for the exact right moment that guided Gay to compose the essay Still Processing as number 85? That is to say, about the 85% mark of the book's duration, right at the moment when a larger narrative's final, most meaningful turning point, its peak of thematic intensity, usually hits. Because in this essay, number 85, much like Deborah Levy shaping her improvised book to the point of explicit thematic questioning, Gay brings the subversion of his guiding question to a piercing clarity. The 2-page essay launches with Gay thinking about a reality TV show that used the painful marriage of Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown as fodder for entertainment. This is the essay. I imagine you have to pitch a show like that. Many decisions and agreements have to occur, probably many handshakes and drinks, plenty of golf, trying to figure out how best to exploit, to make a mockery of a black family, the adults in which have made some of the best pop music of the last 30 years. I never saw it, but it's old hat, the commodification of black suffering. I have no illusions, by which I mean to tell you that it is a fact that one of the objectives of popular culture, popular media, is to make blackness appear inexplicable from suffering and suffering from blackness, is to conflate blackness and suffering. Which is clever as hell if your goal is obscuring the efforts, the systems, historical and ongoing, to ruin black people. Clever as hell if your goal is to make appear natural what it is, in fact, by design. And the delight? You have been reading a book of delights by a black person, a book of black delights, daily as air. That's number 85 in the whole collection. Yeah. One Kairos moment as portal for improvising on another. So this is my last book example. And it's Annie Ernaux's Happening. The journal then can be a way of inviting Kairos, even if Kairos remains a state you can't exactly will. But a sudden, unwilled state of Kairos is not only a portal for writing forward into your life, it can become a portal for writing backwards. I want to look now at how writers use Kairos moments to set up improvisations that take them into the distant past, slipping into that past as though it is the present again. Annie Ernaux's Happening drops us into a short Kairos moment, heading to a medical office to await the results of an HIV test. Within 4 pages, Ernaux's character has her answer. She is HIV negative. But this moment of intense ultimate concern has jolted her backwards, 36 years, into another moment when her existence became focused on one intense ultimate concern: obtaining an abortion during an era in which women and the doctors who helped them could be imprisoned or cast out of France. As Ernaux, as translated by Tanya Leslie, writes of this Kairos portal, quote, "I realized I had lived through the HIV test at the hospital the same way I had awaited Dr. N's verdict in 1963, swept by the same feelings of horror and disbelief." As Ernaux then launches into a narrative of her abortion experience, working from notes in her diary, she brings the reader back to the center of herself in the act of recalling and writing. Quote, "I began this story 1 week ago, not knowing if I would go through with it. Through this story, time has been jerked into action and is dragging me along with it. Now I know that I am determined to go through with it, whatever the cost, in the same way I was determined to go through with my abortion after tearing up the pregnancy certificate, age 23. Ernaud immediately goes on to establish both for herself and the reader the rules of this set of improvisation she has committed to undertaking. I want to become immersed in that part of my life once again and learn what can be found there. The investigation must be seen in the context of a narrative, the only genre able to transcribe an event that was nothing but time flowing inside and outside of me. The diary and the engagement book I kept back then will provide the necessary dates and evidence to establish what happened. Above all, I shall endeavor to revisit every single image until I feel that I have physically bonded with it, until a few words spring forth of which I can say, yes, that's it. I shall try to conjure up each of the sentences engraved in my memory, which were either so unbearable or so comforting to me at the time that the mere thought of them today engulfs me in a wave of horror and sweetness. As a side note to the art of improvisation, I would want to take a moment to point out the concentrated singularity of the main character's intention and the clarity and simplicity of her feeling. Often in workshops and writing programs, we do a lot of urging the writer towards dramatizing mixed emotions, finding undercurrents of sadness beneath a character's anger, or establishing that she might both want something and fear it, know her intentions and lament them. But the main character happening has no such mixed feelings, the young character, as Ernaud lets us understand up front. The pregnancy is just something that she wants to have an abortion at all costs. She has no mixed feelings about that. This is taboo breaking, of course, and being inside this woman's experience with rare honesty and graphic clarity is what we're signing up for in reading the book. Another side note relevant for both fiction and nonfiction narrative writers, notice the clear separation of the character's knowledge, right, the young Ernaud, and the narrator's knowledge as she's undertaking this improvisation. We don't feel suspense because the character in the story is worried that an illegal abortion might be dangerous. Quite the contrary. It's Ernaud's narrator who tells us early on, I wasn't the least apprehensive about getting an abortion. It seemed a highly feasible undertaking, admittedly not an easy one, but one that did not require undue courage. That's the character's point of view, right? The narrator's delivering us. The character did not think it was going to be such a problem. The narrator, separated by nearly 40 years, is in a very different position, linking present and past. Little did I know, it could cost me my life. But back to improvisation. As Ernaud established, her diary and datebook became her prompts for a series of improvisations in which she tries to, quote, revisit every single image until I feel I have physically bonded with it. It's important to note there's not much description or information in Ernaud's diary. Mostly the diary notes where she went, who she spoke to, or it simply records, and she hopes for her period, nothing. Beyond information and description, the power of the marks in the diary and the datebook is just their physical reality. For instance, after Ernaud's character looks up the word abortion in the library index and finds only a few references in medical journals, Ernaud's narrator notes, quote, I had jotted down the names and references of these magazines on the first page of my address book. These marks, scribbled on the page in blue ballpoint pen, exert a strange fascination over me. There's a lesson here for those of us whose work would benefit from a sense of improvisation. When we're working from our journals in autobiographically inspired fiction and memoir, it's most often helpful to approach these not as sources of dead material to be summarized and rearranged, but rather as prompts to imaginatively re-enter the story's past. Sometimes the details you've recorded matter in themselves, but far more often they matter as spurs to bringing your imagination and yourself back into Kairos. For another fascinating example of this, take a look at Sarah Manguso's Ongoingness, a short book in which she decides to write about the obsessive, extensive diary she kept before becoming a parent, but gives herself a strict rule to never quote the diary. It's a whole book about her diary without a single quote from the diary in it. It's pretty amazing. Okay, writing itself as the theme. Now let's look at Ernaud's theme. Let's say you're thinking of writing about the experience of obtaining an illegal abortion. Try this imaginative exercise with me for a moment. What might your driving abstract question be? Ernaud does something bold and instructive. Her theme is not the experience of abortion or anything we might expect to connect to the subject. It's not whether she should regret it. It's not polemically whether abortion should be legal. That issue she takes as too simple to answer. Instead, Ernaud's theme is writing itself. How do we be utterly honest about human experience? And how is it a calling, a service to do so? As Ernaud writes quite early in Happening, establishing this theme, quote, I realize this account may exasperate or repel some readers. It may also be branded as distasteful. I believe that any experience, whatever its nature, has the inalienable right to be chronicled. There is no such thing as a lesser truth. Moreover, if I failed to go through with this undertaking, I would be guilty of silencing the lives of women and condoning a world governed by male supremacy. I'm not able to touch on all the highly improvised books that drew me in over the last 3 years, but at the end of your handout, you'll see some of them. Elizabeth McCracken's novel, The Hero of this book, Yi-Yun Lee's novel, Reasons to Live, Samantha Hunt's The Unwritten Book, An Investigation. Going over this list to prepare this talk, I noticed a reflexivity of these books that are highly improvised from inside a heated moment, a tendency to call attention to writing itself. In so much improvisation, the point of the writing is the power of writing to shape reality and self. This is the last section. Improvisation and revision. So let's say you have no desire to write from within the heat of the moment. Let's say you do not wish to shape spontaneously as you write forward, but rather you are writing a work that won't find its shape until many drafts in. Much reworking and much distance. I understand your condition, although I've written 2 manuscripts that found their shape spontaneously within the first act of drafting. I've also written 2 manuscripts that refused to find form and composition for many years, manuscripts that were nothing like a trumpet solo pouring forth as I stepped up to take a solo in a song. Or were they? A lot of the work we do as writers is done in a state of chronos. Chronos is often how we grind out that first draft or get the details in place for the scene. And sometimes chronos is the state we need to be in to revise, especially if we're doing something mechanical, changing from present tense to past tense, shifting a draft from third person into first person. But too much working from chronos and not enough from kairos can be deadly for a manuscript. This is especially relevant as we're all engaged in a workshop, taking down what can seem like laundry lists of fixes to apply to our manuscripts. Often those fixes can seem to make sense individually but lack connection to your central vision. This is dangerous. Do not let the many suggestions you'll receive in workshop mire you in chronos. Be sure to put all the feedback you've received aside. Create space, physically and in time, to invite a spontaneous response within yourself to the feedback. Re-find your centered connection to your work as though you were encountering it again for the first time with the benefit of all you now know, and respond from there. Some of the suggestions you've considered will spontaneously and organically connect to your centered vision. Other suggestions will naturally fall away. This is how, rather than make the work right, you make it live. Make time and space for the centering, especially if you are finding your work's form, which in more chronos mode of being means you are working on restructuring. Finding form is really structuring. In such a case, I want to propose you actually are like a jazz musician about to step up and take a solo. So many elements of your story, so many images and motifs are now at last available to you. Make yourself in a centered way available to this. In finding form for our written works, in restructuring, we are spontaneously composing. Your material and your manuscript are there on the page or in the Google Doc. To find fresh form, you get to step into a new moment and let what you already know spontaneously connect. Consider using a big yellow legal pad and a pen, a sheet of blank butcher paper, a physical open space for your new composition to do this imagining. Let yourself think through the new shape of your storytelling in a loose, curious manner, following an intuition that is informed by all the writing you've done, all the thinking on the story you've done, all available to a consciousness that is possessed by a centering new insight. This actually is the very short final section. Becoming better improvisers. Can you train at becoming a better improviser? Absolutely. To return to an important truth of improvising, an improviser is working spontaneously with the material at hand, but not without preparation. Jazz musicians prepare in part by soloing again and again and again over short, known structures. The chord changes in the songs All of Me or Autumn Leaves. This is often where improvisers start, taking solos on these structures dozens of times, each solo within the structure a new composition in the moment. Poets do this too. They are aided by a tradition of forms to write within: the sonnet, the sestina, the haiku. Those of us who are working on novels and memoirs need not deny ourselves this preparation and this practice. The key is to also regularly read shorter prose works for their structure, and then to borrow the structure as a form to write inside. Look for short works that you love that have a clear, strong structure, and then look for patterns in language, rhythm, and image, and points of view, and motif that are giving the work that structure. My very favorite personal short prose work to use in this way is a story by Grace Paley called Mother. Do we have any Grace Paley fans here? Do people know Grace Paley's work? Okay. This is a wonderful moment for Grace Paley's work. I just can't recommend it enough. Mother is a great place to start. And I just read her again and again, and I'm reading her a lot more recently. So Mother is only one page. It uses a strong opening image, the mother in a shadowy doorway, and that image invites countless personal substitutions. So the doorway is this archetypal space, right? And we just use this in our nonfiction class, so Alexis is like, yeah, I know we did this. But it was really fun to do it with the undergrads, right? So you've got this archetypal space of the doorway, and then all the memories in the piece are happening in the doorway. But there's so many archetypal spaces in our lives that you can brainstorm for yourself. Looking through windows, looking in mirrors, and it's a wonderful thing to brainstorm on, finding your own kind of substitute for that structural element. It uses a refrain, the sentence rhythm, so she wondered, then is echoed in the sudden sentence, then she died, which is repeated comes suddenly in the middle of the essay, then she died. There's all these memories, and then she died. And then it comes very suddenly at the end of the piece, then she died. I'm indebted to the novelist Christopher Castellani. I like to use his notes on this story because he noted that early in the piece is the sentence, so she wondered, and how much it sounds like then she died. And so you're actually getting a repetition of the sounds of that sentence 3 times, even though you're getting the actual sentence then she died twice. So be attuned to sounds of sentences and how they're creating patterns within short works and how that's making a structure. And then you can steal that structure for your own improvisations, and it gets material out of you that you didn't even know you would put on the page. All right, you can solo endlessly over the structure of Mother, and doing so will make you a better spontaneous composer in anything else you choose to write. So I'm going to leave us with Dizzy's 6 skills for the jazz musician, and I'll leave it to you to tease out any parallels that you see to writing. 1, mastery of instrument. Important, because when you think of something to play, you must say it quickly, because you don't have time to figure how chords are changing so quickly. Style, which I think is the most difficult to master, in as much as there are not too many truly distinctive styles in all of jazz. Taste is a process of elimination. Some phrases that you play may be technically correct, but do not portray that particular mood that you are trying for. 4, communication. After all, you make your profession jazz because first, you love it, and secondly, as a means of livelihood. So if there is no direct communication with the audience for which you are playing, there goes your living. 5, chord progressions. As there are rules that govern you biologically and physically, there are rules that govern your taste musically. And 6, rhythm, which includes all of the other attributes, because you may have all of these other things, but don't have the rhythmic sense to put them together. And that would negate all your other accomplishments. So, hope you will go forward and improvise boldly.